Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we're in our 25th season, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they might be planning for the future. We have had on poets, journalists, novelists, short story writers, all kinds of writers. Even, I must say, we stretch to other kinds of artists. We have had on sculptors, we've had on musicians, we've had on composers, we've had on all kinds of people. If you have an idea for someone who might be a good guest on the Writer's Block, a writer or otherwise, watch for our address at the end of the program. We would be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to mention that the Writer's Block, along with all the other original programming that comes out of Cape Ann TV, and there's a lot of it, is a result of cable access television. It's a service you don't get with Dish. So if you've got Dish, get rid of it. And don't be tempted to switch. Tonight, I'm very happy to say, we do have a writer, a novelist by the name of Barbara Boudreau, a Gloucester resident, and she has recently come out with a novel that's doing quite well and is very well written, called The Frenchman. And we'll be talking about that during the next half hour. Barbara is a Gloucester resident, although she was born in my hometown, Chicago, and traveled around the Midwest for a long time before migrating east. She went to high school in Springfield, Illinois, a town I know quite well. And she went to a college in Montana at Montana State in Bozeman. She came east for a master's degree at the University of New Hampshire and migrated finally to this beautiful city of Gloucester in 1996. And she told me before the program she's never leaving. She's tired of moving and she loves Gloucester. Welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you
Barbara.
very much.
Very nice of you to come in.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I was glad to hear you say you're never going to leave Gloucester.
Never, until they drag me out.
Well, we hope to get a lot more books out of you before that happens.
Oh, thanks. I hope so too.
Now, The Frenchman is this your first novel?
Yes.
And it's about a real Frenchman. It's not a nickname. He's from Paris.
He's from Paris, yeah.
Named Lachance, Jean Lachance.
Jean Lachance, yeah.
Tell us how you got the idea for this book and when it began. When you started working on it.
Well, it was in February of 2007. My husband and I are sailors, and we were sailing many winters in the Bahamas, and we were stuck with the weather in Spanish Wells, Eleuthera, which is northeast of Nassau. And we couldn't go anywhere for a while.
Hurricanes or
well,
something?
big seas. There were like 10, 15-foot seas out there. My husband wanted to do a 50-mile crossing. I didn't. I was begging him not to go.
How big were the seas?
10 to 15 feet.
That's not fun, huh?
No, I don't ever want to do it again. I've done it plenty, and no. Anyway, so that morning we went back to Spanish Wells, and I switched my ticket so I could fly from there. I was going to be there another week. And I had woken up and made the coffee, and I had just had this dream. You know how when you dream and it feels like you just had the dream before you woke up? And it was the first scene of the novel. And I love to write, so I didn't have anything to do. So I got up and opened my laptop and started writing, and I just kept writing and writing and writing and writing. And when I burned the battery, I had my husband take me to shore, and there was a picnic table at this marina with a power pole right next to it that had an outlet on the power pole, so I just plugged my computer in and sat there for a week. I mean, except for nighttime, of course. And I think he was a little upset with me because he wanted me to go exploring with him, and I was just so obsessed with this story that I just kept writing, and by the time I left Eleuthera, I had 20 chapters of the book.
So you had the core of the book, or at least a really good percent of the book.
Yep, I knew where it was going.
And did you have the rest of it outlined?
No, I don't outline. I'm very lazy that way. I like to write improvisationally so that the book kind of decides where it wants to go. I think it takes more time to do that, but I think it also lends a very improvisational voice to the text. And so when I would meet a crossroad, okay, now what do I do now? I would just sit and think a while and then go, oh, maybe I'll do this. And then it would go. But I decided very few things before I actually wrote the book.
So when you were sitting for a week there, plugged in at the dock, did you flesh out LaChance and Dewey and the Detective Santino? Is that remember? Right?
Yeah.
The L.A. guy.
Yeah.
Did you have those characters kind of locked in?
No, I just told the storyline. And as Anne Lamott says, I love what she says. It was a shitty first draft, and I hope I can say that. Anyway, so I got that done in August of that year. And then I actually gave it to Peter Anastas, and he read it through for me because I didn't know what to do with it, right? I didn't have any experience with any of this. And he gave me some pointers, and then I just started working on it little by little. It took me 5 years, really, to get it right. But I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted it to be a good product and a good story. And then 3 years ago, we formed a writers group called The Finish Line at the Gloucester Writers Center. And the group really helped me immensely with the book and how it sounded and forming the sentences and just sort of mistakes that I had made in some of the character development, how a mother and a child might, interact because I don't have children. So there were a lot of people that gave me feedback about what would be realistic and what wouldn't. Yeah.
I was going to mention that before we got to the end of the show, but this is a good place, I think. You say in the acknowledgments, you mentioned a lot of community help, and that this was a kind of a joint effort. And I wanted to ask about your feelings about a novel being a kind of a joint effort when you're getting feedback from people in a writing group or friends or editors. How important is that?
It was vitally important to me. It would not be the book that it is without feedback from people for a number of different things. I actually had a French translator, make sure that the French was right, because I don't speak French, but I wanted to put little bits and snippets of French in there. He uses just phrases, right? And I wanted to make sure that contextually they were correct, so that wasn't a mistake. And then, of course, I had to do a lot of research on the Paris setting, and I had to do a lot of research on the desert setting.
Did you go out and drive?
No, I didn't. I have been through there. And I want to go and visit that area.
You read your book and you decided you want to...
Yeah, that I actually want to see it. I picked this setting. I thought about putting it in Montana because I lived there for 10 years, but I needed a setting that was incredibly isolated. And, the Southwest is that place. So that's why I placed it.
Even more than Montana.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted it to make sure that there was a lot that went into it. It had to be a place you could drive to, but that maybe wouldn't have all of that stuff, electricity and, running water and all of that. It had to be bare bones.
This is set in the just recent past?
It's basically set in the early 90s, 1992, if I had to pick a year.
Is there a year mentioned, a specific year?
No, it's at the very, very first sentence of the book sets the setting. It says California desert, early 90s. That's all it gives.
I was having trouble, but a couple of places people are smoking.
Yeah.
In I don't know, bars or restaurants.
Yes.
And so that's at least 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then the early 90s was before technology really took off. In terms of cell phones and computers and things like that. And I didn't want to have to deal with any of that. I wanted to set it before all of that happened. so that when he pursues her or when Santino is pursuing them, they can't just instantly connect with each other. That made it, to me, a little bit more interesting. Now, when you watch movies and read books and they're texting and doing all of this, to me, it makes it less interesting. They have to use their intuition much
I agree,
less.
I agree.
Yeah.
So Sherlock Holmes is still popular. I
Yes,
think.
that's right. Exactly.
Tell us, without revealing anything, tell us about the book, about in general, and it winds up, by the way, in the Caribbean.
Yes.
I'm not saying for good or ill, but where you initially got the idea.
Of the book?
Yeah.
Well, like I
Not
said,
in the area.
in California?
Does it the book ends where?
An island off of Venezuela.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm being general.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying south, warm waters off the American
Well,
coast.
I mean, for one thing, it's the Caribbean is a place that a lot of people go to sort of escape. I've done a lot of traveling in the Caribbean. There are a lot of people there. I've done some traveling in the South Pacific as well. There are a lot of expats who are kind of escaping their former life and setting a lifestyle up for them that is relatively easy in terms of weather and building and business and those kind of things. So I thought it was the perfect place for them to sort of escape to, where they might never be found. That was the whole point.
Right.
And I'm somewhat familiar with the Caribbean, not that far south, but I'm familiar enough with the lifestyle and the island life and everything that was very comfortable for me
I was
to
wondering
write.
if psychologically you ended it in warm southern seas because it was originally conceived of in the Bahamas, off Florida.
Yeah, no, not really. In fact, I ended it at the airport scene. Originally, the book ended with him just leaving. And then I read the book to my husband, and I got to the end, and I said, the end. And he said, you can't end it that way. And I said, why not? It's my book. He said, you can't end it that way. You're going to really make a lot of people angry. So that's where the whole, whole Caribbean thing came. I mean, we assumed that he went there, but I concluded it with the ending where they actually, am I going to ruin this? Come back
Well,
together, because he was originally just going to leave,
We'll
and I
bleep
was
that out.
yeah, okay, yeah.
So tell us generally about the. I don't want to go into the details of the plot, but how LaChance comes to the United States and the robbery of Prescott, and maybe point the direction of where the novel goes.
Okay.
So that we can entice some people to go out and buy it.
Yeah. What I always say is that it's a great story. It's no literary work of genius or anything, but it really is a great story. And a lot of people have said, wow, I couldn't put it down. And of course, as a writer, that's the one thing that you want to hear from people. I know people that have sat down and started reading it and never put it down and read it cover to cover in one reading, which is possible. You could read this book in 8 hours probably, or 7 hours if you're a really fast reader. And LaChance is an incredibly talented thief, and he's been a thief all of his life. He ended up in an orphanage when he was just a kid, and then has to leave France, and I'm not going to tell you why, and comes to LA just to kind of hide out. So then he meets, the character Dewey Jensen. I love Dewey Jensen's character. He's just such a ne'er-do-well, and they pull a job together because Dewey has knowledge of the score. And then they're going to go to this rendezvous spot to, split the loot. And that's where he ends up meeting Dewey's then girlfriend, Lily, and her three kids.
And her kids.
Henry, Sherry, and Amos, yeah.
LaChance is very interesting to me because he reminds me a lot of noir film characters.
Yes.
He's
Yeah.
very flawed. He's a real criminal.
Yeah.
But he's also decent in
Yeah.
in some profound ways. And you see that when I don't want to say that, I don't want to blow the story, but you see that later in his character development.
Yeah.
He's a couple rungs above Dewey in moral awareness, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it.
No,
But
he has a good heart. It's just that he has never had a chance to use it in his life. He's been alone all of his life. And aloneness is just his existence. So he really doesn't have anything to compare it to. He holds people at arm's length. He really doesn't establish friendships, although he has lots of acquaintances in the business that he has. But when he meets Lily, it really is kind of a love at first sight kind of thing, which I truly believe in. I think that it exists. It happens all the time, whether we acknowledge it or
It
not.
could be permanent.
Yes,
I think.
and then he has this struggle with himself. Can I actually be this person? Can I have emotions? And he goes through a huge metamorphosis in the novel that he finds a caring, loving person inside of him, and she totally brings that out in him. And he's also impressed with her ability to trust. She trusts
Which he
him.
doesn't have, really. He doesn't have, really.
Oh, no, he doesn't trust anybody. So he goes from sort of this hard person with a very thick shell, to someone who can spend time with and wants to spend time with these children, too. And that's crucial to the plot of the book, that he actually falls in love with the children. It's not just her.
And they with him.
Yeah.
Even the suspicious boy
Yeah.
is won over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Henry.
Henry. Henry's great. People love Henry.
I've got a technical question for you.
Okay.
When crime novelists write, or when people write a novel and it centers on a crime, often the central character is the detective.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a temptation to make Santino the big operating person, the kind of the protagonist
No.
who goes after these people?
No, not a bit. I wanted him to be crucial but somewhat peripheral to the plot.
Does he really want to capture them really badly?
Yes, he does. And you'll find out in the sequel
Oh, yes?
what happens, yes.
When? What's the sequel's working title, and when can we
The
expect
sequel's working title is now The Sequel. I can't think of a good title. I wrote it 2 years ago this month. November is the National Novel Writers Month Challenge month. So the challenge is, it's an online thing. You sign up and everything. The challenge is to write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days, which is something like 1,600 words a day. So I was not working at the time, and I decided that I wanted to write a sequel, because it does kind of hang us up, the end of this book. We're like, what happens? I know they went there and all of this, but what happens to them? So the sequel is set 2 years in the future from the end of this book.
So in the mid-'90s?
Yeah, in the mid-'90s. And I can't tell you why, but he's going back to Tucson to retrieve his... Did I give away too much?
Stuff, yeah. I wouldn't say what he's going back to retrieve. Yeah.
So, and that was very interesting, because now in the sequel, they're together. Now they're a family, so it's a much different book. But Santino is also part of the book. And I like his character.
Even though he's an L.A. Police Department detective, and he's far away, but he stays involved.
He stays involved because he can't stand it. He's so intrigued by LaChance that he just can't let it go.
I want to make sure that we get the book up for Ryan to shoot again. Where is this available, Barbara?
Well, it's available on Amazon. If you just write in The Frenchman, it'll come up. Very recognizable cover, with the
Barnes
orange.
and Noble has it as well?
Barnes and Noble Nook Yes, it's available as a Nook book, as a Kindle book, and you can buy it in Gloucester at the bookstore, at Toad Hall in Rockport, the 7-Eleven on Bass Ave, and Last Stop on East Main. Or you can buy it from me.
And
If you want a signed
do you have a
copy.
website? Or
I do.
Can you give us that address?
bbboudreau.com.
BB Boudreau, 3 B's.
3 B's, OUDREAU.com.
That's the URL, BBB Boudreau, BBBoudreau.com. I hope that's confusing enough. And people can buy it online.
Yes, you can buy it online. And I am, in the very, very near future, going to put it on a really good cheap sale. So I intend to, release that on Facebook and Twitter and my website and emails to my email listserv, that I'm going to drop the price for, a certain amount of time. Maybe I should do it in January after this plays, but
Yeah, that might work.
yeah.
I want to go back to something you touched on earlier about research and what you had to do and what you didn't do, what you can do online. I was curious a couple times if you had gone out and fired a Glock to see what that gun handled like, because that's Jean's armament of
Choice.
Choice, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the most common handguns that's sold in the United States. In fact, they had a special on TV about the Glock 9mm not too long ago, and they were saying all the reasons that it was such a popular gun. It was easy to handle and easy to shoot, and it had a repeating. It doesn't have to be. It's a semi-automatic. It doesn't have to be cocked constantly. I wanted him to be armed just because that is his essence. He is a thief. He is capable of using a gun, obviously, but I didn't necessarily want him to use it. I didn't want him to have a violent side. I wanted him to be this sort of frustrated, romantic, or really good-hearted person who was locked inside of his past that he did not choose by himself. So he's a really, really good person. He doesn't intentionally hurt people. So that's why I alluded to the fact that he had never killed anybody in his life, Do
you think women write better mystery novels because they care more about the psychological motivation of crime than men who just have bodies all over the place?
That's interesting. I don't know. That's interesting. That's a very interesting question. I was obviously much more interested in the relationships between the people than I was in the crime. And, the crime takes place in a very short part of the book. It doesn't go on and on.
It's wham bam kind of.
Yeah. But I wanted his skills to come out throughout the book. He's very, very skilled, and he's very savvy, and he's very good at getting what he wants. So I didn't want to necessarily, like he can lift a car like that, that kind of thing.
I just got from Ryan, our cameraman, the 3-minute signal.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm going to have to begin to wrap up. We've mentioned, hold the book up again. We mentioned this, and I want to mention again the sequel. When will the sequel, it's tentatively called the sequel.
I don't know.
When will that be out?
I'm going to link it to the Frenchman title somehow without, so that there's a link between the two by title, hopefully. I have some ideas, but I just haven't come up with a good title yet. I like simplicity.
Is the book finished?
It's finished, yeah, but I'm still working on it. I'm working through it. And
when's the target date?
Oh, I don't really know. I've been advised to get some traction with this one first before I put the next one out. But I mean, within a year, I'll put it out.
So late 2015?
Yeah, sometime,
We'll be
in
looking
there.
for it.
Yeah. I wanted to
And-
mention, too, that the Frenchman was a finalist for a Roni Award this summer in Las Vegas. So I was nominated for a Roni Award, which is the romance novel of excellence. Even though it's not a romance novel by genre, it has romance in it. So it, met the requirements.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun. We went out for the ceremony, and I didn't win, but I was a finalist, and that was kind of fun. It was at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas. So
Congratulations.
thank you. That was
And
really
thank you
fun.
very much for coming down tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I've enjoyed talking to you about The Frenchman, and I hope our audience has enjoyed our conversation as well. If you've learned something about Barbara Boudreau's new book, The Frenchman, and are teased enough to go buy it and then maybe buy the sequel in a year, then the Writer's Block has done its job for the night. Good night, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block.